Cook comes out saying, I don't know if this was real, but there's like a ton of evidence that like Skoda Works was real, that you had these crazy secret weapons. If that is the case, it's of the Townsend Brown lineage, would be my belief.
Yeah. My brain also, a little conspiratorial, goes towards some of that Operation Paperclip and some of the things the Nazis were onto.
Yeah.
You know, because you basically saved like some of the worst people on the earth who just happen to be very smart.
Yeah.
At something. You brought them over here. We know some of them put us into fucking space and shit.
Yeah.
And it's like, what were they able to maneuver? You brought up a lot of amazing research today about anti-gravity and projects that were going on in the 50s and 60s.
But it starts in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know about like Kammlerstab? Have you heard of that? So,
Kammlerstab?
Yeah. Have you heard Kammlerstab?
Fill me in.
So there's this SS officer named Hans Kammler. He's the most ruthless Nazi. Like Albert Speer, who's head of all armaments for the Nazis, said, Hans Kammler was the most ruthless, unscrupulous guy I was forced to collaborate with. And so you're talking about a Nazi who's worked with like Hitler and Goebbels and Himmler, and he's saying that this guy is like the craziest, most ruthless guy. By 1945, Hans Kammler was in charge of all aerial armaments for the Nazis, so the V2s, A4s, everything, and he had this secret weapons program called Kammlerstab or Skoda Works, and it was based in two places, in Czechoslovakia and Poland, and so modern day. Obviously these were Nazi occupied. And you had these three scientists, Richard Mita, who was doing high voltage stuff, which is very similar to what Townsend Brown was doing. Similar experiments, like, kind of short distances, high voltage, maybe asymmetric capacitors. You had Rudolf Schreiber, who was this German technician who had a design for a flying saucer. And you had another guy named Victor Schauberger, who lived in Austria, who we know, he said in his diaries, it says, or I think it was a letter to his son, he says, I'm in Czechoslovakia and what I'm doing is top secret. And this is 1942, right after an SS officer knocked on his door. And so you have all these guys kind of, being housed in like these, secret weapons programs in Poland and Czechoslovakia. A lot of it is actually underground. And they're working on all sorts of crazy stuff. And Mita had designs for flying saucer. All of these guys that I just mentioned had designs for flying saucer. There's another guy named Henri Coanda, who's a Romanian engineer who was also under Nazi occupation. He had a patent for a lenticular aerodyne saucer, and he, I think, also ended up contributing to Skoda Works. So Skoda Works was like a real thing, and they were working on like the most advanced weaponry at the time. And at the same time, you had, Foo Fighters, which are these controlled balls of lightning. They seemed like, they were intelligently propulsed or controlled or whatever, with no vapor trails, moving in and out of Allied fighter flight paths. And so I don't know if there's a connection between that and Skoda Works, but Skoda Works was definitely doing some really crazy stuff. I mean, the rumors were they might have been working on, flying saucer, but there are also rumors. Have you heard of Die Glocke? Do you know what that is? This legendary bell, this German bell. Have you heard of that?
Maybe.
It's this. It looks like this sort of like egg-shaped or bell-shaped, thing. And there's a ceramic chamber on the inside. It's metallic on the outside. And you use a lot, extremely high voltage energy. You create like a torsion field around this, object. You have a person go inside the object, and you slow the inertial reference frame. So gravity and time are coupled. And so if you create, the only ways to affect gravity are basically through mass and energy, right? So you have like an extremely big planet, you're going to, you have this gravitational inward force. But maybe if you have like extremely high amounts of energy, you can also create sort of like these synthetic gravitational effects, and then you can maybe mess with time as well. If you think about it, like the closer you move to a black hole, time slows. And so the idea would be you create this sort of torsion field, and you create this different inertial, this different reference frame on the inside of the bell as on the outside. And so time is actually moving slower on the inside versus the vis-a-vis the outside. And so if it's moving like 1,000th of of the pace of the outside, you can walk out of that thing, after a certain amount of time. You're 1,000 years in the future. And so it's a crazy concept. So that is the lore. That to me is the least believable thing that could have come out of Skoda Works. But we know that, or we have some evidence that Ernest Grawitz, who is head of the SS Medical Division, that Joseph Mengele worked under Grawitz, was maybe involved in this project.
Oh boy.
As was a guy named Walter Gerlach, who was studying gravity, at his university prior to this work. And so it's this really interesting thing. This guy named Nick Cook wrote this book called The Hunt for Zero Point. He documents it really well. And he meets this Polish journalist named Igor Witkowski, who's probably like the deepest on this. And Cook comes out saying, I don't know if this was real, but there's like a ton of evidence that like Skoda Works was real, that you had these crazy secret weapons programs that were like, they put the concept of Wunderwaffe, like German wonder weapons, to shame. It's like next level stuff, but he doesn't know, whether the bell existed exactly or like what exactly was going on. But it's a fascinating inquiry. And there's actually a book by this guy named Tom Augustin, and I think it's called Blunder. And it's basically about how there was this fighting for the scraps of Skoda Works in 1945. And how the Russians ended up with a lot of this stuff and a lot of the frameworks that might have come from Skoda Works, and then the U.S. ended up with a lot of it. And originally around 45, it was thought that Kammler died or disappeared, and now we know actually from a couple of declassified documents that Kammler ended up in the U.S.
Of course he did,
and that we took him back. And so that's this like really crazy kind of, punctuation mark at the end of this story that like is very important and not super well known. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what you make of that, but I think there was a lot of tech transfer at the end of the war, and it wasn't just, you had missions like TICOM, which was, for communications, and ASOS, which is for nuclear stuff. And you had like, Werner, you had Heisenberg and stuff, like in like this like wiretapped room, like trying to figure out what he knew and stuff. That was kind of maybe like the white world nuclear stuff. The way Nick Cook puts it, you had black world nuclear stuff going on, and that was under Kammler. And so Kammler was doing, weird nuclear stuff, and then aviation stuff. The final story here, which I think is just mind blowing, because all of this is still kind of in the like lore mythological realm, but this maybe brings it down a little more, is there's a guy named John Warner IV, who's actually Chris Mellon's cousin.
Of course.
And so he comes from the Mellon family. His grandfather is Paul Mellon. So Paul Mellon is one of the founders of the CIA. And John Warner is having like a martini with Paul Mellon. And, his grandfather is like recounting all these crazy stories. And he's like, 3 or 4 martinis deep. And he says, I remember being in modern day Czechoslovakia, and I'm standing on top of a massive craft, and it's a saucer. And John Warner says, is that the one with the, a bunch of the BMW engines, like, taped onto each other? And he goes, no. And he just like kind of changes the subject. But it was a trip that he and Alan Dulles, obviously third director of the CIA, were
Godfather of Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, it was, exactly. And Dulles was doing all sorts of crazy stuff, like around the war. He was gone fully rogue. You know?
Read Devil's Chessboard?
Yeah, I have.
Oh my God.
Yeah. What a book. Yeah, exactly. And anybody who watches the Sheehan episode I just did should read that book, because it corroborates all the Sheehan stuff too. So you have a lot of weird evidence around like Nazi secret stuff. Like they might have figured out more than meets the eye, and then exactly what they figure out, I don't know.
It's weird.
You have who is Werner von Braun's? Why am I blanking on his name? Werner von Braun's mentor, Hermann Oberth.
Yeah,
he ends up at Convair Convair, doing interesting stuff. And then von Braun obviously ends up here. It's runs our space program. He and Arthur Rudolph, who like literally ran the German space, they created the VT rocket.
Yeah.
Like they're like running like the NASA Saturn program. Like it's literally like that NASA Saturn program is like a transplantation of like the Nazi space program. It's like pretty fascinating.
The 3-way race for resources after World War II and the immediate aftermath and the years after that between Russia, the United States and Britain and the secrets of the world that exist from that race is one of the most underreported great mysteries of our time.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the depth. I mean, you get into the biological weapons stuff too.
Yeah,
You get into, you start to wonder, like, how did these guys not have a Manhattan Project and not get to that? And
Yeah.
and this is pure crazy speculation on my part, but sometimes I do wonder if within those evil, sadistic little Nazi brains of theirs, apparently weren't that little because they knew some science, but like, you get the point.
Yeah.
You know, if like maybe they had gotten to something like that, like a nuke, maybe they had gotten to some insane biologics.
Yeah.
And they had just enough left of whatever lack of humanity they had.
Yeah.
To say, maybe we shouldn't give it to the stash. That motherfucker's a little crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think about that a lot because the shit that they were onto.
Yeah.
And then the deals they were able to make. And let's be honest, the Dulleses had some sympathies, if you will, towards the Nazis. That's very well documented long before the war. And then when the war was closing off, obviously.
Yep.
But like, if that was a part of it, I would... Oh my God, I would love to be a fly on the wall during some of those years, or a fly on the fucking Humvees as they pulled up on shit and, you know, tried to figure out what the fuck to do here. Because there's some crazy stuff that came out.
Yeah, well, you also just look at, even more prosaically, like, look at the fighter jets. Like and then look at the rocket. Like, the V-2 rocket was like 20 years ahead of like anything coming out of the U.S. Like, the Nazis... I don't know if this is like a pro border science argument because there are no like moral qualms about like looking into all sorts of. I think there was like experimental cell block 9 where they were like doing human experimentation on like you know Mengele doing like weird twin. All this stuff is so fucked up. It's so messed up.
It's crazy.
And so I don't know if they just made progress because they were so like psychologically like unbound and like just down for like whatever.
Right. No, like, it's a valid question.
But it's interesting. Like it calls up a lot of questions. Like how did they make that much progress that quickly? Because so much came out of that time.
Yeah.
And you could just say, you know, like that's what war creates. But the amount of progress was like it was next level compared to. I mean, now it's nothing close to that. It's at least as far as like physical world progress.
Fuck yeah, man.
And then, it's obviously towards like a super ruthless evil. And
that's the start of some weird shit that then is used on our end, which is just like, morally, that's like one of the ultimate quandaries. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.